Good evening, dear listener, and welcome back to Midnight Mystery Theories. I'm truly glad you found your way here tonight. The rain is falling gently outside, and this is your time to slow down. There's no need to rush. You can let your body settle into whatever position feels most comfortable right now. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. I always enjoy hearing from you. Tonight, we're gently exploring the quiet vanishing, the stories of brilliant minds who one day simply were no longer there, and the quiet search for patterns that some believe connect them across the years. So take a slow breath in and let it out. Let the rain be your companion as we begin. Chapter 1. The Night Holds Its Secrets, Setting the Scene. As the rain continues its soft rhythm against the window, we find ourselves in the quiet hours once more. Tonight our minds turn towards something subtle, something that has lingered in the background of many conversations in recent times, the quiet vanishing of certain individuals whose lives were dedicated to understanding the universe. Not with drama or sudden alarm, but with a gentle fading, like a light dimming in a distant window. Scientists, researchers, engineers, and those who worked in laboratories and observatories, people who spent their days and nights peering into the mysteries of matter, motion, and the stars above. Some passed in ways that raised quiet questions. Others simply stepped out one day and did not return. We will not rush through these stories. We will walk with them slowly, as one might walk along a rain-slicked path at night, noticing the details, the atmosphere, the feeling of the unknown pressing softly against the edges of what we know. These are not tales meant to disturb your rest. They are invitations to wonder, to sit with the mystery of absence, and to consider how the human mind seeks patterns even in the scattered leaves of circumstance. Let us begin by simply acknowledging the night itself, the same night sky that these individuals once studied or helped us reach toward. The same rain that falls now as it fell on countless evenings when laboratories hummed quietly and trails wound through dark forests. In the chapters ahead, we will meet some of these individuals by name and by their work. We will hear of the trails they walked, the materials they shaped, the questions they pursued, and we will gently examine the patterns that others have noticed, or believed they noticed, in the timing and circumstances of their departures from this world. For now, simply allow yourself to be here. The rain is steady, your body is at rest, and the stories of the quiet vanishing await us, like stars that become visible only when we give our eyes time to adjust to the dark. Chapter 2. Echoes from Earlier Times. Historical Whispers of Vanishing Minds. Before we turn toward the more recent stories that have drawn so much quiet attention in these last few years, it feels right to pause and look back. The idea that brilliant minds working on sensitive or advanced projects might disappear or meet unexpected ends is not something that began recently. It is a thread that runs through much of the 20th century and into the early years of this one. Time and again, when groups of researchers, engineers, or scientists connected to powerful technologies have faded from view under unusual circumstances, people have noticed, they have wondered, they have searched for patterns in the silence they left behind. As the rain continues its gentle rhythm outside, we can take our time with these older echoes. There is no need to rush through them. These earlier moments help us understand that the human impulse to look for connections when scientists vanish is not new. It arises whenever knowledge feels concentrated, whenever secrecy surrounds important work, and whenever the circumstances of a departure feel incomplete. During the intense years of the Manhattan Project and the early atomic age, secrecy was not simply a precaution, it was the very air that many researchers breathed. Scientists and engineers working on the first atomic weapons lived under extraordinary restrictions. Their families often did not know the true nature of their work. Some were moved suddenly from one location to another. A few faces that had been visible in academic circles simply stopped appearing in public for long stretches of time. In some cases, the reasons were later understood as matters of national security or compartmentalization. In others, the full story remained unclear to the wider world for decades. The very nature of the work created an atmosphere in which absence could feel meaningful, even when it was not. After the war, as the Cold War took hold, this sense of shadows around scientific knowledge deepened. Scientists on both sides of the divide sometimes defected, changed sides, or simply disappeared into new identities. Some left behind promising careers and families with little warning. Others were exchanged in quiet arrangements between governments. A few vanished while attempting to cross borders or make contact with foreign agencies. These cases added to a growing feeling that certain kinds of knowledge could carry real danger for those who held them. The public rarely learned the full details until much later, if at all. What remained was the impression that brilliant minds working at the edges of what was known could sometimes be pulled into currents stronger than themselves. It was during this same period that certain whispered stories began to circulate in more private circles. One of the most persistent suggested that groups of scientists were being quietly relocated or removed from public life altogether. The reasons given in these stories were always tied to breakthroughs that powerful interests did not want shared. One such notion, which gained attention in the late 1970s, became known as Alternative 3. It proposed that select researchers were being taken, without their full consent or knowledge, to help prepare colonies beyond Earth, first on the Moon and ultimately on Mars. The story claimed that governments had already discovered that Earth's climate was heading toward irreversible collapse, and that the best minds were being secretly moved to ensure humanity's survival elsewhere. Alternative 3 was presented at the time as a serious investigation, though it was later revealed to be a work of fiction created for television. Even so, it struck a chord. It gave shape to fears that had been building for years, that advanced scientific work was happening in places the public could not see, and that some of the people doing that work were being hidden away. The idea has never fully disappeared. Even now, decades later, it is still referenced when people notice clusters of scientists stepping out of public view. It remains a powerful example of how secrecy and uncertainty can give birth to stories that feel, to those who hear them, like they might contain a hidden truth. Later decades brought other clusters that caught attention in similar ways. In Britain, during the 1980s, a striking number of scientists and engineers working for defence contractor GEC Marconi died under unusual circumstances. Between 1982 and 1990, more than 20 individuals connected to sensitive projects, including work on advanced torpedoes and technologies associated with the American Strategic Defense Initiative, passed away. Some deaths were ruled suicides, others were accidents or, in a few cases, homicides. The concentration of these cases within one company and one broad area of defense research led to speculation that something more deliberate might be at work. Official investigations largely concluded that the deaths, while tragic, did not form a coordinated pattern. Yet for those inclined to look for connections, the Marconi cluster became another example of how researchers tied to powerful technologies could seem to be leaving the world in unusual numbers. In the 1990s and early 2000s, a different kind of list began to circulate, this time focused on microbiologists and researchers working with dangerous pathogens following the anthrax attacks in the United States and heightened global concerns about biological weapons. Several scientists in this field died or disappeared within a relatively short span of time. Some of the circumstances were genuinely strange. A researcher falling from a bridge, another found dead in unusual conditions, others involved in accidents that felt, to some observers, too coincidental. Most of these cases, when examined individually by authorities, were eventually attributed to natural causes, accidents or personal struggles. Still, the appearance of multiple names in quick succession was enough to make some people wonder whether those working on the most sensitive biological research were being quietly removed or silenced. These earlier echoes serve as a gentle but important reminder. The search for patterns in the lives and departures of scientists is a recurring thread in human curiosity. It appears whenever advanced work is surrounded by secrecy, whenever several unusual events happen close together, and whenever ordinary explanations feel insufficient to those who are grieving or simply wondering. Sometimes these searches later reveal real hidden histories, genuine conspiracies, cover-ups, or coordinated actions that were eventually brought to light. Other times, they reveal mostly the mind's deep need to make sense of loss, uncertainty, and the frightening randomness of life. Both possibilities deserve our calm attention. As we carry this awareness forward into the more recent stories we will explore together, we can hold two truths at once. We can remain open to the possibility that some patterns are real and meaningful, and we can also remember how often the human tendency to connect dots can create meaning where only chance and the ordinary difficulties of existence are present. The rain continues to fall steadily outside. The night is long and unhurried. We have time to sit with these older whispers before we turn, gently, toward what has unfolded in more recent years. Chapter 3. The First Quiet Thread. Michael David Hicks and the Beginning of a Modern Conversation. As the rain continues its steady, unhurried rhythm, we turn our attention to one of the names that would later become part of a wider conversation. His story is not one of dramatic revelation or sudden revelation. It is quieter than that. It is the story of a man who spent decades doing steady, careful work in the service of understanding our place in the solar system, and who then, like so many others, simply stepped out of the world. Michael David Hicks was a planetary scientist who spent many years at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. His focus was on asteroids and comets, those ancient travelers that have moved through our solar system for billions of years. These objects are not merely rocks drifting in the dark, they are time capsules. They carry within them clues about how our planets formed, what materials were present in the early solar system, and perhaps even some of the building blocks that contributed to life on Earth. Studying them is a way of looking backward, toward the beginning of things. Hicks contributed to research that helped refine our understanding of near-Earth objects. These are asteroids and comets whose paths bring them relatively close to our planet. Understanding their movements, their composition, and their behavior matters not only for pure scientific curiosity, but also for the very practical question of how we might one day protect Earth from potential impacts. His work was part of the patient, often unglamorous effort to map and characterize these objects. It belonged to the quiet infrastructure of discovery, the kind of work that rarely makes front-page news but makes larger missions and deeper understanding possible. At JPL, many researchers spend their days and nights working on data that arrives from spacecraft, from telescopes, and from careful modeling done on computers. The laboratories there often feel more like quiet offices than dramatic control rooms. Screens glow with orbital paths. Models rotate slowly. Teams discuss measurements and uncertainties in measured tones. It is patient work. It requires long attention and a willingness to sit with incomplete information until more pieces arrive. Michael David Hicks was part of that world for many years. Colleagues who knew him described him as dedicated and steady, the sort of person whose presence helped hold together the ongoing effort to understand the moving pieces of our cosmic neighborhood. In July of 2023, at the age of 59, Michael David Hicks passed away. For some time afterward, the circumstances surrounding his death and the official cause were not widely detailed in public records. In the absence of clear information, space opened for questions. When his name later began appearing in lists alongside other researchers and scientists who had died or disappeared in the years that followed, some people naturally wondered whether there might be more to his story than an ordinary passing. The timing of when details became available, combined with the larger pattern that was beginning to form in some observers' minds, invited speculation. Later, it was reported that the cause of his death was heart disease, consistent with health matters that had been present in his life. His family has spoken clearly and directly about this. They have asked that he be remembered for his contributions to science rather than connected to broader theories or speculation. They have expressed that the online conversations linking his passing to larger patterns do not reflect the reality of his life or the circumstances of his death. This is an important reminder that behind every name in these discussions is a real person with a family that continues to feel the absence. Even so, in the gentle unfolding of this larger story, Michael David Hicks became one of the early threads that others would later pull when examining the broader tapestry. Not because any wrongdoing has been established in his case, but because the timing of his passing, combined with the initial lack of public detail, created room for the human mind to wonder. When we are already looking for patterns, even ordinary events can begin to feel like they might belong to something larger. We sit with his story here not to sensationalize it, and not to suggest connections that have not been proven. We sit with it to honor a simple truth. Every absence leaves a ripple. A mind that once calculated trajectories, studied the composition of ancient rocks, and contributed to our collective picture of the solar system, no longer adds its particular light to that effort. Whether his passing came through ordinary illness or through something else entirely, the result for the ongoing work of science is the same quiet subtraction. One less person is there to notice something others might have missed, to ask a question that might have led somewhere new, or simply to carry forward the patient work of understanding. As you listen in these quiet hours, you might imagine the laboratories at JPL on a night much like this one. The rain falling outside in California as it falls outside wherever you are now. Screens still glowing in some offices, models still slowly rotating on computers, teams still reviewing data from spacecraft, that continue their long journeys through the darkness. The work does not stop when one person steps away. It continues, carried forward by others, even as the absence of a single mind is quietly felt by those who worked alongside him. There is something poignant about researchers who spend their lives studying objects that have travelled for billions of years, only to have their own time here end while the asteroids and comets keep moving. Michael David Hicks was one of many people whose steady, largely unseen contributions helped us see a little further into the history of our solar system. His name later became part of a different kind of conversation, one about patterns and questions that arose after he was already gone. That conversation continues. His work in its own quiet way also continues in the data and understanding he helped build. The rain keeps falling, the night remains long, and we have time to sit with these stories without rushing toward conclusions. Chapter 4: Materials, Alloys, and the Edge of the Known, the Work and Vanishing of Monica Jacinta Reveza. As the rain continues its steady presence outside, we turn now to another story that has lingered in many minds. It belongs to a woman whose professional life was dedicated to creating the very materials that allow us to reach farther into space, and whose own presence one day simply ceased to be found. Monica Jacinta Reza, often known as Monica Reza, worked as a materials engineer and metallurgist. She spent time with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and also with Aerojet Rocketdyne, a company deeply involved in rocket propulsion systems. Her expertise centered on the development and processing of advanced materials, particularly specialized alloys designed to survive the extreme conditions of space travel and rocket engines. These are not ordinary metals. They must withstand intense heat, rapid temperature changes, vibration, and the harsh environment of launch and travel beyond Earth's atmosphere. The work of shaping and perfecting such materials is slow, precise, and often invisible to the wider world, yet it forms one of the quiet foundations upon which larger dreams of exploration rest. When we send rockets and spacecraft beyond our planet, we are asking materials to perform in ways they were never naturally meant to. Inside rocket engines, temperatures can reach thousands of degrees. The forces involved are immense. Finding or creating metals and alloys that can endure these conditions without failing is a specialized kind of knowledge. Monica Reza contributed to this area of work. She helped develop and refine high-strength, heat-resistant materials that support the continued effort to push the boundaries of what humanity can send into the cosmos. One of the alloys associated with her efforts has been connected to applications in rocket engine technology. It is patient, technical work, the kind done in laboratories and testing facilities, far from public attention, but essential to every successful launch. On a morning in June 2025, Monica Reza set out on a hike in the Angeles National Forest near Mount Waterman. It was a place she knew well. She was with companions from a yoga group she had been part of for many years. She was an experienced hiker, comfortable on the trails, and familiar with the terrain of the San Gabriel Mountains. The day began ordinarily enough. At one point during the hike, she fell perhaps 30 feet behind a companion. When he turned to check on her, she smiled and waved, showing that she was fine and continuing on her own for a moment. Moments later, when he looked back again, she was no longer there. What followed was an extensive search. Rescue teams, volunteers, and scent dogs moved through the rugged, brush-covered landscape. The area is steep in places, with dense vegetation and ravines that can quickly hide someone from view. A beanie belonging to Monica Reza was eventually found in a steep ravine below the trail. Despite days of searching, she herself was never located. To this day, her disappearance remains unresolved. No trace of her has been found beyond that single item of clothing. There is something particularly haunting about the suddenness of her vanishing. One moment a person is visible, smiling and waving from a short distance on a familiar trail. The next moment, she is simply gone. The forest did not offer clear answers. The Angeles National Forest, like many wild places, contains real hazards: steep drops, thick brush, the possibility of a misstep on uneven ground. People do disappear in such terrain from time to time, sometimes through ordinary accidents that leave little trace. Yet the specific circumstances in this case, the brief visual contact, the smile and wave, and then complete absence, have left many with a lingering sense that something about the event resists easy explanation. We do not rush to fill that silence with dramatic conclusions. We simply sit with what is known. An experienced person on a trail she knew, a moment of ordinary human contact, and then disappearance. The questions that arise from such an event are natural. How could someone vanish so completely in such a short span of time and distance? What might have happened in those moments after the wave? These questions remain open. They sit alongside the memory of her work, the careful development of materials meant to carry humanity outward, now placed next to the mystery of her own vanishing from a mountain path. There is a quiet contrast here that deserves gentle attention. Monica Razor spent years working on alloys and materials that help us push against the limits of what is possible in space. Her efforts were directed toward endurance, toward creating things that could survive extreme conditions and carry us farther. And then, on an ordinary morning on a trail she knew, she herself became the one who could not be found. The same natural world that she had helped us move beyond through her work had, in a sense, claimed her presence without clear explanation. As you listen in these quiet hours, you might picture the laboratories where such materials work takes place. Controlled environments, careful measurements, the slow testing of how metals behave under stress and heat, and then picture the very different environment of a mountain trail in early summer, with its uneven ground, shifting light through the trees, and the constant possibility of the unexpected. Two different kinds of edges, the engineered edge of what human technology can withstand, and the older, less predictable edge of the natural world. The story remains one of the more striking and unresolved threads in the larger conversation that has formed around these cases. Not because we have answers, but because the absence itself continues to ask questions. The rain continues to fall, the trails in the forest and the trails in our own thinking both wind onward, sometimes leading us to clearings, and sometimes simply continuing into places we cannot yet see. Chapter 5: The General Who Stepped into the Mountains, William Neal McCasland. As the rain continues its steady presence, we come now to a story that has sat at the centre of much of the recent conversation. It belongs to a man whose career placed him at the heart of advanced military and scientific research, and who one day chose to step away from everything into the landscape he knew. William Neal McCasland was a retired US Air Force Major General. During his time in uniform, he served as commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory, an organization responsible for exploring and developing new technologies across a wide range of fields. His work touched areas that sit at the edge of what is publicly understood: advanced propulsion systems, hypersonics, directed energy technologies, and other cutting-edge domains. He also had connections to programs that studies unidentified aerial phenomena, the modern term for what were once more commonly called UFOs. These are fields where national security interests, scientific curiosity, and the unknown often meet. After retiring from the Air Force, he lived in the Albuquerque area of New Mexico. Like many who have spent decades in high-responsibility positions, he carried with him both the knowledge gained from years of service and whatever private burdens come with such work. In late February 2026, at the age of 68, he left his home. It appears he intended to spend time in the wilderness or go for a hike in the rugged landscape that surrounds Albuquerque. He took with him a revolver and holster. He left behind his phone, his prescription glasses, and other personal items that people usually carry when they expect to return. When he did not come back, his wife reported him missing. A silver alert was issued, the system used in many states when an older adult is believed to be missing and potentially at risk. Search efforts were organized, but despite the attention given to the case, William Neal McCasland has not been located. His wife later spoke publicly about his condition in the time leading up to his disappearance. She shared that he had been experiencing chronic health challenges, including difficulties with memory, anxiety, and sleep. She expressed her belief that he may have chosen not to be found, that he may have deliberately walked into the landscape with the intention of not returning. She also noted that since his retirement more than a decade earlier, his security clearances had been of a common, non-sensitive level. This detail matters because it pushes against some of the more dramatic theories that later attached themselves to his story. Here we meet a person whose professional life had brought him into contact with some of the most advanced and sensitive areas of research and technology. He had held positions of real responsibility. He had knowledge that came from years of working at the intersection of science, defense, and emerging capabilities. And then, one day, he stepped into the mountains and desert landscape of New Mexico and did not come back. The combination of his background and the manner of his disappearance made his story especially prominent in the wider discussion that was already forming. When people began placing various cases side by side, his name stood out. a retired general with experience in propulsion, directed energy and UAP-related work, who walked into the wilderness carrying a weapon and left behind the devices that usually connect a person to the modern world. It is easy to see why this particular story became a focal point for those searching for patterns. At the same time, we must hold the fuller picture with care. His wife's account described a man who had been struggling with real and ongoing health difficulties. Memory concerns, anxiety and sleep problems are not small things, especially as we age. They can weigh heavily on a person. The possibility that he chose a final walk into a landscape he knew, with the intention of not returning, is a painful but human possibility. The wilderness can be both beautiful and unforgiving. It offers solitude, but it also offers finality to those who seek it. Many people over the years have walked into remote places with the quiet decision not to come back, and they have done so without fanfare or announcement. His story therefore sits in a complicated space. On one side are the questions that arise from his career and the circumstances of his departure. On the other side is the documented reality of his health and his wife's understanding of his state of mind. Both deserve to be held without forcing them into a single dramatic narrative. There is something deeply human about the image of a man who spent decades working on technologies meant to push boundaries, propulsion systems that could one day take us farther, directed energy concepts that bend the limits of what is possible, choosing in the end to walk into the ancient, unchanged landscape of New Mexico. The mountains and high desert do not care about clearances, research programs, or advanced capabilities. They simply are. For someone carrying the weight of years of service and declining health, that landscape may have offered a final kind of peace, or at least a place to lay burdens down. We do not know what happened after he left his home that day. The searches have not yielded answers. The questions remain open. What we can do is sit with the story as it is, the story of a man of significant experience and knowledge who chose, for reasons that may never be fully known, to step away from the world of laboratories, programs and responsibilities and into the quiet vastness of the land. As the rain continues to fall, we can hold this story gently alongside the others. It adds its own thread to the larger tapestry we are exploring, one of long service, specialized knowledge, personal struggle, and a final disappearance into a landscape that keeps its own counsel. The night is long, and there is still time to sit with what we do not yet understand. Chapter 6. Threads from Los Alamos and Beyond. Additional stories in the tapestry. As the rain continues its quiet rhythm, we turn our attention to several other names that have been drawn into the wider conversation. These stories are shorter in the telling than some of the others we have explored, yet each one carries its own weight. They remind us that when people begin looking for patterns, many different kinds of departures can be pulled into the same frame. Some of these cases have clearer explanations than others. All of them deserve to be held with care. Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico has long been a place where serious scientific work takes place. It carries a deep history, having been the birthplace of the Manhattan Project during the Second World War. Over the decades, it has remained a center for research connected to national security and advanced science. Because of this history, when individuals connected to Los Alamos disappear or pass away, their stories can easily become part of larger discussions, even when the circumstances are deeply personal. One of the names that appeared in these discussions is Melissa Casillas. She worked as an administrative assistant at Los Alamos National Laboratory. In June 2025, she disappeared. Reports indicated that she had been under significant personal stress in the period leading up to her disappearance. Authorities who looked into the case suggested that she may have left of her own volition. Her family spoke of the pressures she had been carrying, including financial and emotional strain. While her absence was deeply felt by those who knew her, the circumstances pointed more toward a personal decision made under difficult conditions than toward any larger external force. Another name connected to the same laboratory is Anthony Chavez. He was a retired construction foreman who had worked at Los Alamos earlier in his life. Around the same period in 2025, he also went missing. His case, like Melissa Casillas's, was included in some of the broader lists that began circulating online. Yet the details surrounding his disappearance appear to have been more ordinary in nature, tied to the circumstances of an older man who had already retired from his work at the laboratory. These two cases from Los Alamos illustrate how easily names can be grouped together when people are searching for connections. Both individuals had some association with the same institution, and both disappeared within a relatively close time frame. To those looking for patterns, this can feel significant. To those who knew them, however, the stories remain deeply personal, shaped by individual lives, pressures and choices, rather than by any coordinated event. A different kind of story belongs to Carl Grillmeyer. He was a respected astronomer and astrophysicist at Caltech. Known for his work on exoplanets and the structure of galaxies, his research contributed to our understanding of worlds beyond our own solar system and the larger architecture of the universe. In early 2026, Carl Grillmeyer was tragically murdered during a carjacking. A suspect was later arrested and charged in connection with his death. This was a violent and senseless crime, one that brought grief to his family, colleagues, and the wider scientific community. Unlike some of the other cases we have discussed, his death had a clear perpetrator and a clear motive rooted in ordinary criminal violence rather than anything connected to his research. Even so, because of his prominence as a scientist and his institutional connections, his name was included in some of the lists and discussions that were forming at the time. This is an important reminder of how patterns can sometimes be drawn too broadly. A murder committed during a carjacking does not require a hidden explanation tied to secret knowledge or targeted silencing. It can simply be what it appears to be, a tragic and random act of violence that could happen to anyone. Beyond these specific names, other cases have been mentioned in the wider conversation. Some involve individuals who worked in research or support roles connected to national laboratories, aerospace organizations, or related fields. A number of these people passed away from documented illnesses, accidents, or other circumstances that have clear explanations. When these cases are placed alongside the more mysterious ones, they can create the impression of a larger pattern, yet many of them stand on their own, each with its own context and its own quiet ending. What all of these stories share is the simple fact of loss. Whether a person disappeared under unclear circumstances, chose to step away during a difficult time, or was taken by violence or illness, the result for those left behind is the same. There is grief. There are questions that may never be fully answered. There is the everyday absence of someone who was once part of the fabric of other people's lives. When we look at these stories together, it is natural for the mind to search for connections. The human tendency to find patterns is strong, especially when several events happen within a few years and involve people who had some connection to scientific or technical institutions. Yet it is also important to remember that each of these departures belongs first and foremost to the individuals and families involved. Not every absence is part of a larger design. Some are the result of personal struggle, some are the result of ordinary tragedy, some remain unexplained and may stay that way. We approach every name with respect. These were real people who lived real lives. They had colleagues who worked alongside them, families who loved them, and routines that were suddenly broken. The quiet vanishing, when it occurs, leaves holes that no theory can fully fill. Theories may offer comfort or a sense of understanding to those searching from the outside, but they cannot replace the specific grief of those who knew the person who is gone. As the rain continues to fall, we can hold these additional threads gently. They do not all point in the same direction. Some pull toward personal explanations, some toward tragedy, and some remain open. Together they form part of the larger tapestry we are exploring, but each thread still belongs to its own story. The night is long, and we have time to sit with the complexity rather than forcing every story into a single shape. Chapter 7. Mapping the Search for Patterns. As the rain continues its steady, unhurried rhythm outside, we come to a quieter but important part of our time together. Having walked through several individual stories, we now step back and look at the larger shape that some have tried to trace across them. When people began placing these names and circumstances side by side, certain elements stood out, not to everyone and not with equal weight, but enough to make some observers pause and wonder whether a pattern might exist beneath the surface. One of the elements that drew attention was the institutional connections. Several of the individuals had ties, sometimes direct and sometimes more distant, to organizations involved in space research, advanced materials, propulsion concepts, or work connected to national laboratories. Places like NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and various Air Force research facilities appeared more than once. For those searching for meaning, this clustering around institutions that deal with sensitive or cutting-edge technologies felt noteworthy. It raised the question of whether the work itself, rather than simple coincidence, might have played a role in what happened afterward. Another element that stood out was the setting of several departures. A number of the cases involved time spent in remote or natural areas. Some people were last seen hiking. Others disappeared while walking in wilderness or mountainous regions. To those looking for connections, the repeated appearance of trails, forests, and open landscapes suggested a possible method or a shared vulnerability. The idea that several people connected to technical fields might have been drawn, or drawn themselves, into isolated places invited speculation about whether something deliberate could be at work. The timing of the cases also became part of the discussion. While the individual events spanned several years, many of them clustered in public attention between 2023 and 2026, when several names began circulating together in online conversations and then in wider media. The concentration of discussion created a sense that something unusual might be happening within a relatively short window. For some, this clustering in time strengthened the impression of a pattern. For others, it simply reflected the way information spreads once a few cases gain visibility. Finally, there was the nature of the work itself. Some of the individuals had been involved, directly or indirectly, with projects connected to advanced materials, asteroid detection, plasma physics, propulsion research, or inquiries into unidentified aerial phenomena. To those inclined to see deliberate intent, these areas of study felt significant. They are fields where new discoveries could carry strategic value, where breakthroughs might affect national capabilities, or where knowledge could be considered sensitive. The possibility that people working in such domains might be targeted, whether by foreign actors seeking to slow progress or by other forces wishing to keep certain knowledge hidden, became one of the central theories in the wider conversation. These observations are understandable. When several people with overlapping professional backgrounds leave the world under unclear or unusual circumstances, the mind naturally begins looking for what they might have in common. This is not only a human impulse, it is also in many ways a scientific one. Science itself advances by noticing patterns, testing whether they hold up under scrutiny, and remaining open to explanations that go beyond the obvious. The search for connections is not inherently suspicious. It is part of how we try to make sense of a complex and often unpredictable world. At the same time, there is another way of seeing these same elements. Thousands of people work across the broad fields of aerospace, materials science, national laboratory research, defense technology, and related disciplines. These are large communities. Over the course of several years, a certain number of deaths and disappearances will occur within any group of that size. Some will come from natural causes and illness. Some will come from accidents. Some will come from mental health struggles or personal crises. Some will be the result of crime. Remote hiking areas and wilderness regions see disappearances every year, regardless of a person's profession. These are simply realities of living in a large country with vast natural spaces and an aging population. The human brain is exceptionally skilled at finding patterns, even in distributions that are essentially random. This tendency has a name, apophenia, and it serves us well in many situations. It helps us notice real dangers and real connections, but it can also lead us to see meaning and intention where only chance and the ordinary difficulties of life are present. When we are already primed to look for patterns, especially after a few striking cases gain attention, it becomes easier to notice similarities and harder to register the many differences between individual stories. Both of these perspectives deserve gentle consideration. On one side is the possibility that some of these cases may be connected in ways that are not yet visible, that people working on sensitive technologies could, in certain circumstances, become targets. On the other side is the statistical and psychological reality that clusters can appear even when no coordinated force is at work. Most large groups of people will, over time, produce collections of events that look meaningful when examined closely. In the quiet of this night, we do not need to choose one view over the other with certainty. We can hold both possibilities at once. We can remain open to the idea that real patterns may exist in some of these stories, while also recognizing how easily the mind can impose patterns on events that are better explained by coincidence, individual circumstances, and the simple fact that loss touches every community. The rain continues to fall. The stories we have explored remain what they are, some clear, some mysterious, and all of them belonging first to the people who lived them. We have time to sit with the uncertainty rather than forcing it into a single shape. Chapter 8. Theories in the Gentle Shadows. As the rain continues its steady fall, we arrive at a part of our exploration that lives in the spaces between what is known and what remains unclear. When answers are incomplete and circumstances feel unusual, the human mind naturally begins to offer explanations. Theories grow in these spaces. Some are grounded in historical precedent. Others stretch further into speculation. All of them deserve to be considered calmly, without either automatic rejection or unquestioning belief. One of the theories that has appeared in discussions around these cases suggests that certain individuals may have been silenced because they possessed knowledge of significant breakthroughs. The idea is that some of these researchers or engineers may have been working on technologies or insights that powerful interests did not want to see developed or shared. This could include advances in propulsion systems, exotic materials with unusual properties, or deeper understandings of phenomena that are not yet part of mainstream scientific conversation. According to this view, the quiet removal of key people could serve to slow progress in areas that might shift balances of power or challenge existing structures. A related theory points toward the involvement of foreign intelligence services. In this framing, nations seeking to gain an advantage in sensitive technological domains might target individuals who hold valuable knowledge. The goal would not necessarily be to kill, but perhaps to extract information, to disrupt ongoing work, or to prevent certain capabilities from maturing. History offers examples of intelligence operations focused on scientists and engineers, particularly during periods of technological competition between nations. For those who see this pattern in the current cases, the combination of institutional affiliations and unusual circumstances suggests the possibility of targeted action by outside actors. A smaller number of voices have wondered about even deeper layers of shadow. These theories suggest the existence of programs or entities operating beyond normal governmental oversight, hidden structures that might remove or neutralize individuals who come too close to certain kinds of knowledge. Ideas of this nature often draw from older stories and long-standing suspicions about secret projects and compartmentalized research. While these notions tend to live further from the center of mainstream discussion, they continue to appear whenever clusters of unusual events involve people connected to advanced science. These theories arise for understandable reasons. When several people connected to technical fields depart the world under circumstances that are not immediately clear, it is natural to look for explanations that go beyond ordinary chance. Incomplete information creates space, and the mind moves to fill it. In addition, there is a long historical record of governments and powerful organizations keeping secrets, sometimes for legitimate security reasons, and sometimes in ways that later proved harmful or unethical. Real conspiracies and cover-ups have occurred, particularly around technologies with military or strategic importance. This history makes it reasonable to remain open to the possibility that not everything happening in sensitive fields is visible or fully accounted for. At the same time, it is also true that most clusters of misfortune, when examined carefully and individually, tend to reveal ordinary explanations multiplied across many separate lives. Illness, accident, personal crisis, mental health struggles, and random violence exist in every profession and every community. When many cases are viewed together through the lens of suspicion, it becomes easier to see connections and harder to register the differences between them. The same human tendency that helps us notice real patterns can also lead us to impose meaning on events that do not require hidden coordination to explain. We explore these theories here without rushing to accept or reject them. They are possibilities whispered when facts remain incomplete. They deserve neither automatic dismissal nor uncritical acceptance. Some theories may contain elements of truth, others may reflect our discomfort with uncertainty more than they reflect actual events. The healthiest approach is to hold them lightly, to consider what they suggest while remembering that they remain, for now, unproven explanations rather than established realities. There is also a human cost to how these theories spread. When stories of disappearance or death are quickly folded into larger narratives of silencing or conspiracy, the individual people involved can become reduced to symbols. Their families, who are often still grieving, may find their loved ones' lives discussed in ways that feel disconnected from the reality they knew. This does not mean all questioning should stop. It simply means that theories, no matter how compelling they may feel, should be held alongside respect for the actual human beings whose stories are being interpreted. As you listen in these quiet hours, you might imagine theories as shapes forming in the clouds on a rainy night. Some drift into clear forms for a moment before dissolving. Others linger longer. They can be interesting to observe, and sometimes they point towards something real, but they are not the sky itself. The sky, the fuller picture of what has actually happened, remains larger and more complex than any single shape we might trace within it. We do not need to land on certainty tonight. We can sit with the theories as possibilities, while also remembering that many of the cases we have discussed continue to have ordinary explanations available. The rain keeps falling. The night offers us time to consider these ideas without being ruled by them. Chapter 9. The Counterpoint: Randomness, Grief, and the Limits of Pattern. As the rain continues its steady presence, it feels necessary to also sit with another voice in this conversation, the voice that urges caution, that reminds us of what we do not know, and that speaks on behalf of those most directly affected by these losses. While it is natural to search for patterns when several unusual events appear close together, it is equally important to consider the possibility that we are sometimes seeing connections that are not truly there. Families of those who have passed or disappeared have spoken with clear pain about how their loved ones' stories have been used. Many have expressed distress at seeing the people they knew turned into characters in larger narratives without their permission. They have watched as personal tragedies, whether caused by illness, accident, or private struggle, were placed into frameworks of conspiracy and silencing. For those who are grieving, this can feel like a second loss. Not only has someone they loved left the world, but their memory is now being shaped by strangers into something that may bear little resemblance to the life that was actually lived. Colleagues and those familiar with the professional worlds these individuals inhabited have also offered important counterpoints. They have noted that many of the people whose names appear on these lists were not working on highly classified breakthrough projects at the time of their passing or disappearance. Some had retired years earlier. Some held roles that, while valuable, were not at the center of sensitive or revolutionary research. When stories are told at a distance, it can be easy to assume that every person connected to a national laboratory or aerospace organization possesses world-changing secrets. In reality, these institutions employ thousands of people in many different kinds of roles, most of which do not involve access to information that would make someone a target. Investigations into these cases have been ongoing. The FBI and congressional committees have looked into whether connections exist between the various deaths and disappearances. While the process continues, some cases have already been clarified as having no link to any larger plot. Official statements have emphasized that at this stage, there is no clear evidence of a coordinated campaign against scientists or researchers as a group. This does not mean every question has been answered. It does mean that the strongest claims of a deliberate, organized effort have not been supported by the information currently available. There is also a simpler, more ordinary truth that deserves our attention. The wilderness claims lives every year. People go hiking in remote areas and do not return. Illness takes others, sometimes suddenly and sometimes after long struggles. Personal difficulties, grief, depression, financial pressure, or the quiet weight of aging affect people in every profession, including those who work in laboratories and technical fields. When we focus only on the connections between cases, we risk overlooking the simple, often heartbreaking randomness of existence. Not every departure requires a hidden explanation. Some are simply the result of being human in a world that does not always offer clear reasons. This tension between pattern and randomness is itself part of the mystery we are exploring. The same set of events can be read in very different ways depending on the lens we use. To one person, a cluster of names connected to scientific institutions may look like evidence of something deliberate. To another, it may look like the natural distribution of loss across a large population over time. Both readings are possible. Both can feel true to the person holding them. The difficulty lies in knowing which interpretation is closer to what actually happened. There is comfort in believing that events are connected and meaningful, even when that meaning is dark. It can feel less frightening to think that something deliberate is occurring than to accept that loss can arrive without warning or reason. At the same time, there is also value in the quieter perspective that reminds us of our limits. We do not have access to every piece of information. We cannot know the full inner lives of the people whose stories we discuss, and we are all vulnerable to the human tendency to find shapes in the clouds, even when those shapes are formed more by our own need for understanding than by anything solid on the ground. As you listen in these quiet hours, perhaps you can hold both of these perspectives gently. We can remain curious about whether real connections exist in some of these cases. We can also acknowledge that many of the stories we have touched upon may ultimately belong to the ordinary, painful, and often inexplicable unfolding of individual lives. The rain continues to fall outside. It does not explain itself. It simply continues. In much the same way, these events continue to exist whether or not we are able to place them into a larger and more satisfying pattern. Chapter 10: The Human Heart of the Mystery. As the rain continues its steady rhythm outside, we come to the part of this story that matters most. Behind every name we have spoken, behind every theory and every question, there was once a living person, not a symbol, not a data point in a pattern, and not a character in someone else's narrative, but a full human being with a life, with relationships, with thoughts that no one else will ever fully know. When we discuss these cases from a distance, it can become easy to think of them as a collection of events. We talk about timing, institutions, circumstances, and possible connections, yet each of these departures represents the absence of someone who was loved. There are colleagues who once shared daily conversations, who now find themselves missing a particular way of thinking, or a familiar presence in the room. There are families who still catch themselves setting a place at the table, or glancing toward an empty chair, even after months or years have passed. The quiet vanishing is not only about patterns or theories. At its core, it is about absence, the simple, profound reality that someone who was here is no longer here. A mind that once solved difficult equations, that worked patiently with data from distant spacecraft, or that shaped new alloys capable of withstanding extreme conditions, no longer adds its unique perspective to the world, the particular way that person noticed things, the questions they would have asked, the small insights they might have offered in a quiet moment. All of that is gone. A smile that once appeared on a hiking trail, or across a laboratory table, or during an ordinary conversation, is no longer there to be returned. These are not small things, they are the quiet substance of a life, and when that life ends or disappears, the absence ripples outward in ways that are often invisible to those standing further away. It is worth pausing here to remember that most of the people whose stories we have touched did not set out to become part of any larger mystery. They were researchers, engineers, administrators, and scientists who spent their days doing their work. Some were deeply passionate about understanding the universe. Some were simply trying to contribute in their own way, while also navigating the ordinary challenges of being human. They had colleagues they respected, families they cared for, and private struggles that no one outside their closest circles fully understood. When their names later appear in conversations about patterns and possibilities, it can feel to those who knew them best as though something essential has been taken from their memory. In these quiet hours, perhaps we can hold a moment of simple respect for all who dedicate their lives, in whatever form that takes, to understanding the universe and our place within it. Whether their departures were ordinary and expected, or sudden and surrounded by questions, their contributions remain. The data they helped gather still exists. The materials they helped develop continue to be used. The questions they left behind are still being considered by others who came after them. Even when a person is no longer here, the thread of their effort can continue moving forward, carried by those who remain. There is something quietly moving about this continuity. The work of understanding the cosmos does not depend on any single mind. It moves through many hands and many lifetimes. At the same time, each individual mind brings something that cannot be perfectly replaced. The particular combination of curiosity, patience, and perspective that one person offers is unique. When that person is gone, the larger effort continues, but it continues with a small and irreplaceable piece missing. We do not need to turn every absence into a story with dramatic meaning in order to honor it. Sometimes the most respectful thing we can do is to simply acknowledge that a life was lived, that it mattered to the people around it, and that its ending, whether clear or mysterious, left a real and lasting hole. The rain continues to fall. The night remains long, and in the quiet, we can remember that behind all the questions we have explored tonight, there were once ordinary human moments, conversations in laboratories, walks on mountain trails, and lives that were for a time fully present in the world. Chapter 11: Reflections on Knowledge, Shadows, and the Night Sky. As we near the close of our time together, we can allow ourselves to step back from the individual stories and the questions that surround them. Instead, we can simply sit with what these stories, taken together, might gently invite us to consider about knowledge, about absence, and about the vast darkness that surrounds us all. The universe these scientists and researchers spent their lives studying is immense. It is mostly dark, cold, and filled with phenomena that we are only beginning to understand. Much of what exists operates according to rules we have only recently begun to glimpse. Black holes, dark matter, the behavior of matter under extreme conditions, the possibility of life beyond our own world. These are not small questions. They are questions that require patience, precision, and a willingness to sit with uncertainty for a very long time. The people whose stories we have touched were, in their own ways, part of this long and patient effort to bring a little more light into that darkness. Some of this work happens in open laboratories, where ideas can be shared and tested freely. Other parts of it take place in more shadowed spaces, behind security clearances, within classified programs, or in areas where national interests and scientific curiosity overlap. Both kinds of work are real. Both involve human beings who carry curiosity, responsibility, and the ordinary weight of their own lives. When someone who has been part of this pursuit fades from view, it is entirely natural to ask why. The mind wants reasons. It wants to know whether the disappearance was connected to the work itself, or whether it belonged to the quieter, more ordinary mysteries of being human. It is also natural, and perhaps even necessary, to remember that life itself is fragile. Not every unanswered question points to a hidden hand or a deliberate design. Sometimes people simply become ill. Sometimes they struggle in ways that are invisible to those around them. Sometimes they step into the wilderness and do not return. And sometimes, even after thorough searching, the reasons remain unclear. The universe is not obligated to make sense to us, and neither is every individual life. The rain continues to fall tonight, just as it has fallen on laboratories and forests and quiet homes for as long as humans have looked upward and wondered. The same rain that falls on research facilities where data is analysed also falls on mountain trails where people sometimes disappear. It falls on cities and on empty places alike. This continuity can be strangely comforting. It reminds us that our questions, no matter how large they feel, are taking place within a much older and larger rhythm. The rain does not explain the mysteries we carry. It simply continues, asking nothing of us in return. Whether the patterns some people perceive in these stories are real, or whether they are largely the product of our pattern-seeking minds, one truth remains gentle and steady. Every mind that seeks to understand adds something to the collective light. Every researcher who spends years studying asteroids, or developing new materials, or modelling the behaviour of the universe, contributes in small but real ways to what we know. When one of those minds is no longer present, that light dims a little. The work continues, carried forward by others, but it continues without that particular way of seeing and questioning. This is true whether the absence came through ordinary means or through circumstances that remain unclear. There is a quiet humility in recognizing this. We do not need to solve every mystery in order to respect the people who lived inside it. We do not need to decide once and for all whether patterns exist or whether most of what we have discussed tonight belongs to the ordinary unfolding of many separate lives. We can hold both possibilities with a kind of open gentleness. We can remain curious without becoming certain. We can feel the weight of absence without needing to assign it a dramatic cause. As you listen in these final quiet moments, you might imagine the night sky turning slowly above us. The same sky that the researchers we have spoken of spent years trying to understand. It does not hurry, it does not explain itself. It simply continues its ancient movement, holding stars and darkness and questions in equal measure. Below it, the rain keeps falling. And here we are, small and temporary, trying in our own limited ways to make sense of both the vastness above and the losses we encounter here on the ground. Perhaps that is enough for tonight, not to arrive at answers, but to have spent some time in the presence of the questions themselves. Not to force meaning where it may not exist, but to acknowledge that meaning and mystery often live close together. The night is long, the rain continues, and the sky above remains, as it always has, both a source of wonder and a reminder of how much we still do not know. As our time together comes to a close, thank you for spending this quiet time with me. These stories belong to the night, and I hope they brought you a sense of calm curiosity rather than unease. Wherever you are right now, I hope you feel safe and relaxed. If this episode helped you unwind, I would be grateful if you considered subscribing. New stories are always waiting here in the quiet hours. For now, sleep well, dear friend. The night is long, and you are held gently by it. Good night.